Hey guys out there, it's Penelope in London, and I'm reading the chart of June the 19th. About half an hour ago from this video, at 22:17 p.m. British summertime, Chiron moved into the sign of Taurus, which I'm going to do a bit of an update on. So if you look at this, we've got this chart, and I'm going to go a minute. So you can see here, if you see this pointer just here, you can see that it says 29:59. And at that point, at 22:18, if I move 1 minute forward, it then moves into the sign of Taurus, which it's going to be now for some time. Then it will retrograde. I'll give you the dates, and then it will go direct and then move back into Taurus later this year. But it's going to be there for a while. So Chiron is in Taurus, is an experience of crisis of values. And it's where we may experience a lack of self-worth and overcompensate by, thinking that money is the answer and possessions are the answer. And it's also where we may distrust that our body or think that we're not beautiful. And, we've all got beauty in us, and it's not just an outer thing. It's at a soul level. And also it's where we will learn to rely on our own bodies and the body experience. And, some people are born with Chiron in the sign of Taurus. I was born with Chiron Pisces. That's, it's moving through a sign on average every 8 years. So this has now happened, and it remains in Taurus, apart from the retrograde, which I'll tell you about. It remains in Taurus until 2033, and it will move into Gemini in 2034. And that's 8 years. And it's a collective wound that Chiron carries, will be centered in the territory of Taurus. And also Venus is involved in this. The body, the earth, the throat, and the voice. And the deep question of what are we worth? What am I worth? So I was really feeling that today. I was thinking about where we take up space, or we don't take up space, or we don't think we've got the right to take up space. And if we were very wounded in childhood, then we can feel that we didn't take up space. And particularly kids that are abused or suffer abuse, they will hide themselves and not take up space. And this can play out throughout life. So we're all worth, and we've all got intrinsic value to our existence. It's not something that we have to earn, prove, or accumulate in order to have that value. So what I'm talking about now is how this is going to be, work out for the collective. But you want to look to your own chart to see where this falls. It's currently in my fifth house, and you can look where it is for you, what house it's in. So we need to understand Chiron himself if we want to understand this and the mythology around that, his nature, and why astrologers working in depth psychology tradition, they do look at myth, and they do look at the heroes and the mythology and the Chiron, himself. And we have the depth psychological tradition, and following the foundational work of Melanie Reinhardt. If you've ever looked at her book, it's worth looking at. You understand him as one of the most significant bodies in the chart. And that's what I like to work with. When I began my own healing journey and started looking at astrology in around 2000 and I'd say 15, I got a bit serious with it. And my learnings continue since then. I would say that, I was very interested in understanding my Chiron and where it was placed and the aspects to it and where it was transiting. So I'm going to share some stuff, and hopefully it resonates with you. And also, if you want to book, then I do have a booking link that's in the description. So let's go to the mythology of Chiron. Chiron was born under circumstances that already encoded everything he would come to represent. His father was Kronos, which is Saturn, the god of time, of structure, of the ancient order. And his mother, Philyra, I pronounce it maybe wrong, but I'll spell it for you, Phillyra. And she was an ocean nymph, and Kronos had transformed himself into a horse to conceal his encounter with her from his wife Rhea, and that's spelled Rhea. And as a consequence, Chiron was born as a centaur, half human and half horse, a being that belonged fully to neither world, divine in origin, animal in form, and human consciousness. His mother was so horrified by what she brought into the world that she abandoned him. And you might relate to that in one way or another. And she later begged to be transformed into a tree, a linden tree, rather than continue to exist in the shame of what she had created. So from the very beginning of this story of Chiron, Chiron carries the wound of a child who was rejected at birth, the one whose very existence caused the mother to turn away, and the one who arrived into the world already marked as wrong, as other, as too much, as not enough. All of those things, together. And this is not an abstract mythological detail. It is the psychic signature of the Chiron wound as it manifests in individual charts and in the collective. The deep and the pre-verbal sense of being fundamentally flawed, of having been abandoned at the root of existing in a body or an identity that the world did not know how to receive. So I think we can all relate to that in one way or another throughout our lives. And yet, what Chiron became from the beginning is extraordinary because, abandoned by his mother, he was taken in and educated by Apollo and Artemis and the divine twins, the gods of the sun and the moon, the music and hunting and healing and prophecy. And he became the greatest teacher of his age. He taught Achilles the art of war and medicine. He taught Asclepius, if I'm pronouncing that right as well, who became the god of healing. And he taught Jason, Hercules, Theseus, the great heroes of the Greek world passed through his hands. He was a healer, a musician, an astrologer, and a philosopher. And he was the bridge between the animal and the divine, between the raw, instinctual nature of the horse and the refined wisdom of the civilized mind. The very wound of his origin, yeah? So the rejection, the otherness, the being born between worlds became the source of his capacity to teach and to heal. So, and that happens for most of us. I found, whatever our wound was, where we've been wounded, we tend to, with wisdom and time, we become a healer that incorporates that knowledge. And this is the heart of what Melanie Reinhardt identified in her foundational work on Chiron, on the healing journey. And the wound is not separate from the gift. It is the wound that opens the capacity. Not because suffering is ennobling, it's not, but because where one has been broken in places, when we've inhabited darkness and we've been broken down by things without being destroyed by it. And often many of us have been through things that we thought were going to destroy us, but didn't. And it's when we have found that way to continue in the absence of the things that should have been given and were not. And that's one of the, where one has access to a kind of wisdom that cannot be acquired in any other way. And that's why we're all so unique. We've got such unique stories. No two stories are the same. The myth holds one more chapter that is essential to understanding Chiron and the meaning around his wound. The wound he was most famous for was not the wound of birth, which is interesting. It was the wound that came to him in the middle of his life through no fault of his own. Hercules visited the centaurs and a conflict broke out. And in the chaos, one of Hercules' arrows tipped with venom of the Hydra, a poison from which there was no cure, struck Chiron accidentally. And Chiron, being the son of a god, was immortal. He could not die, but the poison gave him perpetual, unrelenting pain that nothing could heal. And he had spent his life healing others, and he could not heal himself, which sounds very sad, but, I can get that as well, where we spend time helping others. I find when we are sharing stuff on social media and whatever, and we're, putting a message out there, often we're talking about ourselves. It's something that we're trying to work with ourselves. So when you look at posts, actually, you can say, oh, this person is probably dealing with that, whatever Not 100% always, but definitely when people write in depth about things, often it's something that they've experienced. So he had spent his life healing others and he could not heal himself. He carried that wound for a very long time until eventually he made a choice. He offered to give up his immortality in exchange for the freedom of Prometheus, who had been chained to a rock by Zeus as punishment for bringing fire to humanity. And Chiron chose mortality. He chose to be able to die rather than to continue in endless suffering. And Zeus honored the sacrifice and placed him among the stars. That's very beautiful, isn't it? And some say, as the constellation of the Centaurus, some as Sagittarius, the one who had been born rejected, who became the greatest healer of the age, who carried an incredible, incurable wound, who ultimately chose a conscious death over the prolonging of agony, and that is Chiron. And it is that full arc of his story that lives in the symbol when we encounter him in our charts and in the collective as well. And Chiron leaves Aries now. You know, it's left Aries. You can see here. I know the chart's not moving much, so I hope you're happy to just listen to me. You can see that at 22:17, 22:18, there's it 29:59, and then it moved 1 minute, and then it became Taurus. Now the thing is that if you are in, you know, that's 10:30 p.m. roughly in the UK. So if you're in California, 8 hours behind. If you're in New York, then it's 5 hours. So you can, but we know where they're already at this point. So Chiron is now left Aries, and for the years Chiron has been moving through Aries, the collective wound has been centered in the territory of identity and the right to exist. So if you go back in your mind over the last, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, you will see that there was a lot around identity and a lot around territory of identity and the right to exist. So Aries being the first sign of the zodiac, it's self-asserting itself into being. It's about courage, the courage required simply to begin the primal fire of being the individual. And the Chiron wound has been the wound of that very first movement, and the wound of not having had the right to exist on one's own terms of the self. And we didn't during COVID, did we? We didn't have, it was almost like people were being put in boxes so much, that people were being forced into things they didn't want to do. And it was like you didn't have the right over your own body, your own terms. We couldn't live on our own terms. And the self that was shaped by this force, and it's like really, there was unacceptable stuff going on, and it took a lot of courage also, but it was also met with a lot of opposition. And this is what we can look back on, and then also other areas of identity. So many people have been living through a profound crisis of basic selfhood during this transit, and the question of who I am when the structures I depend on for identity are removed. And the question of whether I have the right to begin something, to assert something, to be visible, to have an opinion, say what I think and what is important, what rights I have. And these are Aries wounds, and the Chiron has been moving through this territory since 2018. So if you go to 2018, 2019, 2020, all the way through to 2026. So it's not that the healing of Aries, it's not the healing of Aries wound, it's not that it's complete. It's not complete that it went through that, it's just a layer. And the Chiron transits do not work like that. It's not a completion, it's like a recognition. And the individual placements in our own charts remain. But the collective emphasis is shifting. The wound is moving to new ground. Okay? And then you want to look at what your own Chiron is in your chart, if you haven't looked at it. So Chiron into Taurus is the wound in the body, and Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is very beautiful. And it is the sign of the earth, the senses, the physical world, and in its most immediate and tangible form. It is the sign of what we can touch and smell and taste and feel beneath our feet, the ground beneath our feet. It is the sign of the garden, and the body, of what grows slowly and endures, of the relationship between the creature and the ground it inhabits. And also, it governs specifically the neck and the throat and the larynx and the vocal cords and the thyroid and the territory of the voice, of what passes between, the interior world and the exterior, and, also our mind. And then we, our feelings, and we express through our voice. And, the physical mechanism through which we speak ourselves into existence. This is how we make things happen. So, Chiron in Taurus is the wound that lives in the body, not metaphorically, but literally in is the flesh. This is the collective wound of felt worthlessness that has no language yet, because it arrived before language did. And before we could think, before we absorbed it in the quality of the touch we received or did not receive, in whether the body was treated as something sacred or something inconvenient, and, or treated badly. We've all come into the world at different places, and, different mothering and different fathering. So some of us have been severely wounded through our early years as well, in many ways, and collectively also, by even in the observance of, tragic things happening, we get affected. So this is in whether physical needs were met with warmth or with absence. Because if you think Venus as well, and the tone of the voice, and, if there was absence or something worse than absence, there can be worse things than absence. So Chiron in Taurus carries the wound of the body that was not welcomed, not nourished, not trusted, not held as inherently valuable simply by the virtue of existing. And I think that's a lot for us to come to terms with, that a lot of us feel that we, we don't think we have the right to exist, which is incredible. I'm not saying that of everybody, but a lot of, I'm aware that a lot of people are apologetic for who they are, what they think, what they feel, you know, afraid to speak their voice or use their voice as well, or their voice has been shut down and they've had to learn how to use it. So, at the collective level, across the 8 years of this transit, we are being asked to confront a civilizational wound around worth. And the dominant culture has created systems that assign value to human beings based on what they produce, what they earn, what they own, what they look like, how useful we are, to the economy and the machine. And Chiron in Taurus is the wound that lives inside every person who has absorbed the message. Because it does feel like, if we really think about it, it feels like a hamster wheel, like, we've got to fit in and do all of these things. And most people naturally, it's not about fitting in, but it's naturally we are just getting on with our lives. We sleep, we eat, we have creativity, we work, but sometimes people are forced into work that they just can't tolerate, but they have to do it, or they have to do 2 or 3 jobs, and they have no time to nurture themselves whatsoever. So, however, this message came to us that we're not enough. We're basically going to have to look at our own value, and our our worth is not contingent on all of these outside things like people looking in. So, so the safety and belonging must be earned, that idea, and that the birthright of the very living creature that breathes. We have every living creature. You look at a little insect, you look at a little ant or a little spider, and all of these beautiful ducks and all of these birds and everything. They've all got a right. It's glorious to see these things, and so the throat is where this wound often lodges in the body, and the voice that learned not to speak, because speaking brought consequences. The words that were swallowed so many times that the throat simply closed around them, and the creative expression and the authentic self-disclosure, the simple saying of what is true, and in a decent way saying what is true, as well, and being punished for that. I experienced that in my childhood, speaking the truth, and it not going well at all for me at the time. So all of this is held between, in our body, between the lungs and the lips and the jaw, and the tension we hold in our body as well, being unable to move our body because the voice has been so stuck. So Chiron in Taurus across these 8 years is working directly with that, with the discovery of the voice as an act of self-worth rather than self-protection. And there are ways we can work the voice. I'll do another video on that. But, we have the ability now to be able to use our voice in very sensible ways, in very beautiful ways, and breath as well. And getting to a place where we can breathe from the lower below our diaphragm and take in full breath and get to feel safety in our body. So the healing that Taurus offers is it's available to us, if we embody it, and it's slow and it's deeply Venetian in nature. It's very beautiful. It does not come through insight alone. Insight has its place, but it comes through the body, through returning and being still. There's a guy called Nick Pearson that a friend introduced me to, and I had a couple of sessions with him, and he basically says, that we're all overthinking, and I agree, we do, particularly with now Uranus, as you can see here in Gemini, if you look at my chart. Uranus in Gemini at 3 degrees, we know that the mind and the communication is overload. I've turned off all my notifications on my phone because and I'm getting a lot more done, I have to tell you, which is good, great. I might be missing some notifications, but if I see them, I see them. So anyway, so it comes through the body through returning carefully with great patience to the physical world as a source of genuine nourishment. Today, I was able to sit on the grass for an hour and a half with my feet with no shoes, socks on, and in the shade because it was really hot in London. And I had to think some things through. This 29 degree, I was really pushed the last couple of weeks, because I had the transit sun squared to my Chiron and Saturn in the fourth house. They're both conjunct. And that was very difficult. I had a very difficult week with intrusive memories and remembering things and getting clarity. And I've got my Neptune down in the fourth house as well, transit. So it's like an undoing of, it's dissolving stuff that I didn't remember. It's bringing stuff up, which has been very useful for me to understand myself better and the reality of my own life. So back to this, when we return carefully with great patience, to the physical world as a source of genuine nourishment, because I don't think we treat the world as though it is the source of genuine nourishment. And, through learning to, inhabit the senses without guilt, there's things, smelling things. Like I was in the park, there was some rosemary, and I rubbed my fingers on the rosemary plant and had a smell of that, and then lavenders. So the senses, through discovering that the earth and the body, that it's made of the earth, that the, and it's not a problem, it's medicine. The earth is medicine. And we've been so sort of, thinking that things outside ourselves, like I'd never done it, and I'm sorry if anybody else has, but things like injectables, Botox, and the diet pill, that all of these things, or the diet injections, and all of these things that we're doing, wanting these quick fixes, when the earth is the thing that heals. Good food is the thing that heals. The thing that's been most healing to me is eating well, and looking after myself, less, no perfume. I don't have any perfumes, smelling candles that smell, or, even cleaning chemicals. I'm very minimal on that stuff, and I get fragrance-free stuff because I just can't tolerate synthetic smells, So then, coming back to this, the Taurian path of healing is also the path of genuine self-acceptance, and that's very difficult. for most of us. And I will tell you, if there's a guy on Instagram who's has a company. It's called the True Mirror Company. So True Mirror Co. So True Mirror, and I visited a true mirror, which means that it wasn't when we look in the normal mirror, it's a reversed image. We're not seeing ourselves the way other people see us, and also there's a miscommunication in the light. So because of the way it's reversed, that we're not really seeing who we are in a traditional mirror. So he does a particular type of mirror where the mirrors bounce off each other and you get to see yourself in the way that other people see you. And it's so beautiful. I really suggest you check out his page, True Mirror Company. And that would also, I think, lead to self acceptance as well. Because, can we believe that we're not seeing ourselves the way that others see us instead of this reversed image? I had a really good experience with it. I messaged him and I said, do you have any of these in London? Because he's in New York, I think. And he told me a place in London where there was one. It was a bit of a funny spot in a place 5 miles away from my live. But I went, and I have to say that it really lifted my spirits looking in this mirror, and I recorded it as well. So I put it on my Instagram page too. So the self-acceptance, not performance, but self-acceptance, not the affirmation repeated in the mirror, not the saying, I love myself, but the slow interior shift that happens when we stop trying to fix what we have told is broken and begin instead to receive what is actually here. And the body knows things that the mind has not yet caught up with. And Chiron in Taurus is asking us to begin listening to that knowing, and also to trust the physical intelligence that has been carrying us often against considerable odds at all times. And the basic issue at the heart of this transit, and Taurus always returns to basic issues. It does not complicate. It's not complicated, Taurus. It's really simple. It's basically self-respect. And the question of whether we can find enough genuine self-respect to stop seeking our worth in the accumulation of things, in the approval of others, in the holding of positions that give us the temporary feeling of being enough. And when we accept ourselves for who we are in the simple silence, accepting myself for who I am and being with that for a moment and being okay with that. And the more we do it, the more we can come back to it. But sometimes we'll get lost in space, but that is more the thing, just sitting with it. And when we can accept ourselves even in those moments for who we are, not for achievement, but for simply returning to the breath as an example, to what's always been true, it becomes easier to find peace in the outside world. And not because the outside world has changed, because it's unlikely to do some miraculous change, but because the ground beneath us finally feels solid. Now, the current aspects, Chiron in Taurus, it's got several current aspects that are amplifying the themes in the sky. So Jupiter is squaring Chiron. So let's find this. And Jupiter is here at 27 degrees, right? And Chiron is here. So this is a square at the moment. And Jupiter is the planet of expansion and faith and the dynamic tension between the wounded healer, where Chiron contracts around old pain. Jupiter wants to reach beyond it, and it believes that something larger is possible. And hopefully we'll begin to feel that something larger is possible. And as I've been going over past memories that have been coming up, I've been thinking life has to be better than this. It has to be. And it isn't a case where people, if you've been through traumas, and we all have, and people say, oh, just don't think about it, or just, I know I've said about breathing, but if I said to you, if you're telling me a serious issue and I just say, oh, go on holiday, take a deep breath, those things don't work. It's about sitting with ourselves, but also having people that can hear us as well. We need that too. And the square creates some productive friction. It's not comfortable. I've been really uncomfortable the last week. I don't know about you. If you have, you can put it in the comments. but it's a kind of discomfort that is trying to help us, you know, to reach the deepest faith that cannot be borrowed from an institution or in a tradition. This isn't about institutions or traditions. It can only be found in the self. And Chiron is the one that shows us where in ourselves we gave that authority away and why. So we've all done it. We've all given away authority to, you know, inappropriate friendships. We've given our authority away to, you know, maybe parental abuse. We've given our authority away as adults that we think we have to do something to fix that and stay in situations we don't want to be in, or we have to, you know, stick at a job we don't like or make money a way that we don't want to be doing it. So it's, you know, these things need looking at. And Venus here, Venus was squaring, it's moved off, but Venus was in a square also to Chiron, and you know, the planet of love and relationship intention with the wound. So that would have been, in fact, if we go back, and I just go back, let's say today is the 19th, the June 19th. So if I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that would have been, you know, the last week, Chiron also square to Venus. And that's significant, you know, for the ingress as well. Venus square Chiron can surface old relational wounds and early patterns around love, you know, and whether we have been loved for who we are, and how we were treated, or, you know, what we provided, or what others provided, you know, particularly when we was little, and around whether the body, you know, was received with care or with judgment. And these patterns can feel really uncomfortable to look at, but the square makes them visible. And the good thing is when we see where there was, you know, violation or really mistreatment, you know, it's very difficult to see it. But in maturity, when we become visible, then we can begin to understand the genuine healing is that, you know, we can be vulnerable, but we have healthier values, and we, you know, we understand our values. And my values are, you know, quite simple for me. You know, I made a list of them. They're not in front of me right now, but they're really simple, you know, of what's important to me. What is a value? It's something that is important to you that you couldn't take off a list, like whatever that may be. So Chiron is in a quintile, which I'm learning about quintiles, to Mercury. So let's see, Mercury, and Mercury is going to be going retrograde, but I've done the previous video on that if you want to go and check that out. So Mercury is here and Chiron is here. So that's generally when it's a quintile is 72 degrees, and also it wants to be spoken, you know, it's the territory right now, it's about worth. So Mercury, the mind, is speaking as well about worth and the body, about the voice, what has been held. It's finding a way towards language, you know, how do I get language for this? So I've been doing some writing this week around that as well. And this quintile suggests that the articulation, when it comes, it's not going to be ordinary. And you know, you may surprise yourself if you sat down and wrote out what you're feeling. It will carry something of creative intelligence that comes only, you know, in places where we've been genuinely, you know, hurt and broken, and where, you know, where we've had to put ourselves back together. We can really figure something out. So the North Node, let's see here, is in a sextile to Chiron, which is lovely. And it sextiles Chiron, and that's the soul's evolutionary direction in the flowing aspect of the wounded healer as he crosses over the threshold. And there's something deeply lovely about that ingress there, because with that, with the North Node, it's the direction of the collective soul is being drawn towards the healing that Chiron and Taurus is making available, you know, and on, you know, it's not, there's no conflict with that. The North Node is our path, and the North Node will be moving into the sign of, if I take this forward again to the 19th, which is now, that you see there, 60 degrees. So That north node will be moving into the sign of Aquarius because the nodes move the opposite way to the planets move around the chart. If that makes sense. If not, you can let me know and I'll explain more. So at this moment, there's an alignment there, and what is being healed now is in service of where we're going, which is really good. And closing with this now, this is coming to the end of the video. If we return to the mythology, because the ending of Chiron's story seems to me the most important part of it for where we find ourselves now. Chiron chose to give up his immortality. He chose to be able to die. He chose release from unending pain over the continuation of a life in which the wound could never close. And in making that choice, he freed Prometheus and the one who had brought fire to humanity. So that you could look up the mythology of Prometheus if you wish. And who had given the gift of creative intelligence and civilization to the mortals, and who was being punished for it, you know? And Chiron's conscious surrender released the principle of human creative fire back into the world. So there is something in that for us during this ingress. The wound we carry in the body, you know, the wound we carry in our body. If you just put your hand, if you're listening right now, you could put your hand on your chest and you could understand that the wound we carry in the body and in the throat around worth, you know, it has perhaps been so long with us that it has begun to feel like the definition of who we are. And the healing that Chiron in Taurus is offering across these 8 years is not the elimination of the wound. Chiron's wounds do not just disappear. That would be good, wouldn't it? But they can be met. So it's like a meeting and naming, and they can be carried consciously rather than driven underground where they shape everything without us being seen, and then we're just in reactive mode. And in that conscious meeting, something is released. Some creative fire, you know, we have creative fire, some capacity for genuine expression, some form of voice that has been waiting. They're a voice waiting in you to, you know, to go forth. So Chiron has crossed into Taurus, and the wound comes home to the body, and the long healing of the earth and the flesh and the voice and the question of worth begins a new chapter. And it will not be, you know, it's not going to be fast because it moves so slow, and Taurus is very slow as well. So, but you know, but it's real, and it's very real. When we go back, I did another video on Chiron in Taurus, and I spoke about Louise Hay and that stuff like that, but I'm not going to go there now. And then it will go direct. So let's do this before I go. So if we go months ahead, you've got Chiron at 0 degrees right at this moment. You're going to go a month ahead. It's going to go, it's not going to even be 1 degree. Then it's going to go retrograde. I've gone 2 months ahead. I'm not going to mess around with this thing up here. I'll just play with it here. So then it will go retrograde. So that's August, September, October, November. You see here, December. And then it will go, see, it's still December, it's still retrograde. And then in January, it's going to go direct. And then it will be, if I keep moving, it will be back by April. It will move back into the sign of Taurus for 8 years. Okay, catch you later. But I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.